Good evening and welcome to the Asia Society. I'm Rachel Cooper. I'm the Director of Culture as Diplomacy and thrilled to be able to welcome you to what I think will be a really wonderful program with two very dear friends, extraordinary scholars, and I'm very excited that we are able to support this program tonight. First, I want to tell you that this is part of Culture Matters, a new program that we have started this year, which really tries to situate the world we live in within a larger context. And I think that's really what tonight is all about. First, I'm thrilled that Hassan Abbas and Hussein Rashid are with us tonight to help launch this wonderful new book, The Prophet's Heir, which I hope you will have a chance to read. Hassan Abbas is the Distinguished Professor of International Relations at the Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He has also served as the Senior Advisor at Harvard University's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Earlier, he served as a Bernard Schwartz Fellow at the Asia Society, and that's where we first met. And he is currently doing research on building narratives for countering political and religious extremism and the rule of law reforms in developing states. And he's often been on national news, covering many different issues, including CNN, Fox News, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and the NewsHour. Hussein Rashid is founder of Islamicate, L3C, a consultancy focusing on religious literacy. He is currently teaching at the New School, and his research focuses on Muslims and U.S. popular culture. His work includes exploring Shia theology, the interaction between culture and religion, and the role of arts in conflict mediation. He co-edited a book on Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. He is currently co-editing a volume on Islam and popular culture and another volume on Islam in North America. He's published several articles on Imam Ali, and his current projects include a documentary on American Muslims, a history revealed, and a museum project on religion and jazz. Please welcome Mr. Hassan Abbas and Hussein Rashid. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation and launch the book.
Thank you for that very kind invitation, Rachel, that very kind introduction, Rachel. And thank you and the Asia Society for the invitation to take part in this conversation. It really is an honor. You know, I will tell you that this book, The Prophet's Heir by Hassan Abbas, was very much on my to-read list for this summer. And the invitation accelerated my reading of it. And it is a masterful work of scholarship. It is eminently readable and really offers us a history not just of Abi Talib, who is the main focus of this, but of his family, including his wife Fatima, his children Hassan and Hussein, and his ancestors as well. So I think there's a breadth and an approachability to this volume that I really, really appreciate and strongly encourage people to read it on their own. And so, Hassan, the question that I want to start asking you with is, why did you choose to write this book? You're coming from an international relations background. This is very much a work of religious history, for a religious community. What prompted you to write this book?
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm delighted to be here with Asia Society and Hussein, with you as well. My relationship with Asia Society goes a long way. 10 years ago as Bernard Schwartz Fellow, and since then I've greatly benefited from support from Asia Society, and Hussein, your work has truly also inspired me. This book, you're right, this is different than what I've done before. My books on extremism in Pakistan and Taliban and on other security issues in South Asia and Middle East. However, my research and my travels across the world had reminded me again and again that in this modern day and age, the way we frame religious experience, and especially the way Islam is framed and seen and observed and practiced, is in a constant transformation, a constant change. It's the security dynamics which have brought a spotlight on Islam. And the spiritual Islam is now somewhere hidden behind it. And also that the modern day geopolitics, rivalries, global rivalries, the issues of terrorism, counterterrorism, they've taken a center stage, taking away the focus on when religions and spiritual groups talk to each other in spiritual language. And I thought, what's the way to go back to that central idea? The idea of Islam, which, if I may dare say, got muddied in the process in this modern day and age. We so often confuse Islam with Muslims also. One would argue, you look at the people who practice religion to get an insight into the religion. However, Islam is a 1400-year-old religion, and as the Muslims believe, this is a continuation of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Also, I thought, what's the best way to, in my humble effort, to reframe some of these issues? How to bring it back to light, the spiritual essence and the core message of religion, which to me is all about not only tolerance, but about pluralism, about harmony, about coexistence, about respecting the other, even if you differ with the others from the others. So I thought it's the life of Ali, which is a reflection of the life of the Prophet, would offer me the best way to present my case. That's the kind of the short story behind it.
So, Hassan, you've already started, I think, hinting at what you're hoping the readers will get out of this book. And I've already expressed some of what I've got out of the book. But I think let's be explicit about it. Could you tell us maybe the top 3 takeaways you're hoping a reader will have from reading this book?
Thank you. Up front, I would say, first and foremost, I think the life of Ali and Ali ibn Abi Talib and his character provides an insight into Islam which is very relevant to the contemporary world. The contemporary world within the Muslim world, outside the Muslim world, and in terms of Islam's relations with everyone else. We used to say Islam and the West, forgetting Islam is very much in the West. And Islam is as much Western as Eastern, I would argue. But the first message is that Ali's life is so extremely relevant to the struggles and challenges and debates that Muslims are facing today, in terms of especially about the sectarian issues. The way, I'm so often asked this question, whether in Middle East or in my original homeland, Pakistan, or increasingly in the United States. As an American, I have not seen people asking others, okay, are you Catholic? Are you Jewish? But we also often are not only asked, one would assume one is Muslim from name and skin color, but the second question, which in my 20-year life in the United States, this was never the case previously, that someone would ask you, oh, so you're Shia, you're Sunni? And I thought Ali's life provides that bridge. That's the first major takeaway. The second one, I would say, is that the Muslim themselves and the outsider observers as well see different groups of Islam so much boxed into different categories that they see more of the conflict and the tension and the tussle and the heated debates rather than the core message that I had mentioned earlier on as well. And again, I thought it's Ali's own life experience of tolerance, of accepting the other. He was never a politically ambitious person. His whole claim to fame, if I may call that, was about spirituality, about the message. It was not about him per se. And that has been, it seems to me, forgotten by, if I may dare say, within the Muslim communities, both Shia and Sunni. I often think Sufis got it really right, in a sense that they allow the life of Ali to inspire them beyond any sectarian labels. And last but not the least is linked to this idea of the legacy of Islam and its relevance in terms not only of spirituality, but about a system which is egalitarian, which believes totally in justice or dedication to justice, fair play, equality. And these often, of course, these are Western new political science terminologies. But if anything, anyone would even just open up the sermons of Ali, and Ali being the only one, I may say, who left his mark in terms of sermons, letters which are codified, which are written, which are produced in comparison to any other companion of the Prophet. Those are in Nahj al-Balagha, which is the book, a collection of Ali's sermons. And any you take out any page or any major statement or policy statement of Ali, and you'll see the idea started from justice, from equality, from honoring everyone else, of not using violence to take care of religious doctrinal issues. And I thought that's the legacy of Ali, which needs to not only be reinvented, but reproduced or reframed for the Western as well as Muslim audience, especially the young audience. The three takeaways, I think.
Thank you, Hassan. I think that adds a lot of clarity to the vision of what you have for this book. It definitely comes through. I'm hoping for listeners who haven't read the book that it allows them to understand better what this book is about. But there are a couple of terms that you used just now that maybe it's worth us spending some time on, because you talked about Sunni and Shia and Sufi. And I think if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes helping us understand who those communities are and maybe just broadly what they see as their relationship to Ali.
Thank you so much. Basic, but such a central issue. Post the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his life, as we know, there's a schism. The schism explained itself or exposed itself in terms of the modern day Shia and Sunni, although historically these groups took a lot of time to develop. These developed in parallel. This was not a one. People often try to compare it with Catholics and Protestants or with other groups. It's a different phenomena. These groups had intermingled, had talked to each other, but the basic issue that allows us to think and be very clear about what these three major groups, if I may call that, are. The Shia Muslims are the ones who believed that Ali ibn Abi Talib deserved to be the first caliph, and that his right was taken away through politics and through political intrigue, they believe, and that Ali was also the imam, the spiritual heir of the Prophet, and through him and his family, that spirituality and that spiritual kind of legacy continue. For the Sunni Muslims, they believe Ali to be one of the first four caliphs. They believe Ali to be a political heir also in that sense. However, they believe the first three companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Usman, were also very important, very accomplished, which is true. Even many Shias would believe that. But they would think that process of political successorship opened up or unfurled in a logical fashion, and that was all well. And that the Sunni Islam remained, in a sense, the dominant phenomena with Umayyads and Abbasids and others. Shias also, in terms of whether it was a Fatimid empire, which was a Ismaili Shia empire, also many other places, the Shia also were predominant. And unlike this, just one fact, often because at times dominant narratives take control of our academic and political and media narratives, it is often framed, the Sunnis are 90%, the Shias are 10%. That's not true. There are so many countries which are today Shia majority. Azerbaijan, Iran, of course, everyone knows, Iraq, Bahrain, some other countries as well in hardcore, in main Middle East today. One would argue the Shia presence, if you take in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, others, in the heartland of Islam, historically, the Shias may be 35 to 40%, in some cases even more. So that's the Shia Sunni thing. It is another way many people would frame it is it's a political thing because they would like to dismiss it. However, there is historically the Shia and Sunni groups, their core message remains the same, but they developed in terms of jurisprudence in slightly different variations. The Sufis, again, to be clear, a Sufi can be a Sunni Sufi, a Sufi can be a Shia Sufi. Also, because they would follow jurisprudence in a certain way. However, they are apolitical in a sense, or Sufi especially believes that in most of their systems and most of their historical context, they believe Ali as the patron saint, if I'm borrowing this word from Christianity, Ali being the master Sufi, and everything that derives or inspires Sufism comes from the teachings of Ali. So in a sense, Ali is one. If there are concentric three circles, Ali is in the common. Shias think him to be the central figure. In the Sunni Islam also, I can mention very briefly, many Sunni schools of thought. Look at Shafi'i, Imam Shafi'i, who was one of the four principal jurisprudence leaders. You look at his poetry and you would think this even Shias would not say what Shafi'i is saying. So within the Sunni school of thought, and Barelvi Sunnis, for example, in South Asia, they are dominant, and they would argue that Ali was spiritually number one, in a sense, or spiritually was the top contender in terms of spiritual legacy of the Prophet. That's how I would summarize. It's not a good summary, I know, but that's the best I can do in this time.
Hassan, thank you. No, considering you're trying to collapse 1,400 years of history, law, theology, spirituality into a 3-minute clip. One of the things, just staying on this point for a moment, that going through your book, one of the things that struck me in terms of how you framed the discussion within the book is that there really isn't a debate about loving the Prophet and the Prophet's family, including Ali, right? This is a Quranic injunction. So that the Sunnis, the Shi'is, the Sufis, they're all agreeing that you love the Prophet, you love the Prophet's family. The question is, what does that love look like? And that's really what I think comes out of these types of differences that you're talking about in much more depth, but it's how that love chooses to express itself in the world. And what that commitment to loving the Prophet's family looks like and what that means and the theological implications of that. And I think that to me was something that came out very strongly and very clearly in the book. Would you feel that's a fair assessment of what you were trying to get across?
That's true. That's absolutely true. Also, the way Ali was seen, for some, it became a cult. For some, it became a hook to spirituality. For others, all the ideas around Ali became a way to get into the politics, or for others, it was a divisive issue. And by and large, historically today, these labels have become extremely problematic. And in this problem of sectarianism, and what do I mean by sectarianism? I mean people just defining Islam in terms of whatsoever they believe in, or their group thinking is the real Islam, and everyone else is an apostate or outside the domain. It is problematic because that allowed takfirism. Takfiris are those who, we know this idea linked to Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and in some ways Taliban as well, and other extremists who would think they know the real Islam. Their real Islam is the core message, and everyone else is outside that domain. And that allows them to then use violence and legitimize use of violence. Those who loved Ali also at times, I feel, their thinking got overshadowed by a personality, which was not the purpose. It was, even the Prophet would so often say, it is the principles that matter the most. For the family of the Prophet, it was not that just because they are the family of the Prophet. There were many members of this family who are very well known. For instance, the famous name, Ali ibn Abi Talib, which was Abu Talib, the father of Ali. He was called Abu Talib because one of their sons was called Talib. We know of other brothers of Ali, Jafar and others, but the famous name, which is used in the name of Abu Talib, is often, we don't know anything about him because he was not part of the mainstream Muslim discourse. He had very little contribution. So it was not necessarily about the personality. The personalities were important because they were reflecting what the core message was, which was the oneness of God, which was about the divine message of about humanity, about the purpose of life. And I often feel on both sides in this politics, although they often say the family of the Prophet, they use it for often purposes which appear to be or turn out to be divisive rather than bringing people together. Sorry if I don't know if I got your question right.
No. I mean, I think all of this is so illuminating and is so exciting. So picking up on this thread that you've given us in this idea of using love of Ali as an excuse for something else. let's go back again very specifically to your book and some of the history. One of the things that you pick up is this idea that Ali is the embodiment of prophetic teaching, of Quranic teaching, that he is attempting to not just teach what the Prophet taught, but to live what the Prophet taught and what the Quran teaches. And you trace this through some of his writings and through some of his actions. And one of the points that you make is that through his actions, that he starts generating enmity. This is the political conflict that you talk about. And very specifically, what I would like to get into is that you say that the teaching of the Prophet and of Islam is about upsetting the tribal order that was in Arabia at the time. And that Ali continues this upsetting of the tribal order when he is caliph. And this becomes one of the reasons that people start attacking him, is because they want to go back to what they're familiar and comfortable with. And I think, and this is something I shared with you privately, is, I have two children in high school, and I shared some of this book with them because I thought it was so readable and so profound. And so this question actually comes out of their question, but I think it was a really relevant question for us today, which is, I think being raised in a Western educational system like I was, dynastic succession seems anti-egalitarian. But what you're suggesting, and you're not the only scholar to do this, but really I think what you make clear is that Ali becoming the heir of Prophet Muhammad, in fact, is much more egalitarian than the system that was there before and is upsetting that order. And I think it would be useful if you could expand on that a little bit and clarify why that's so.
Thank you very much. Very profound question. And I really appreciate the feedback from your children. This reminds me of that in the process of this book, how this book project in so many ways, and different than my other works, turned out to be a family project, especially with the COVID-19 situation in the pandemic, where we were together rather than me traveling often or going out. But it was so often that my three daughters, Zainab, Zahra, and Sherbano, contributed significantly to framing of my issues, often asking me, so where are the women in the family of the Prophet? Mm-hmm. Why there's in the top 5, they say Ahlul Bayt, the Prophet, Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein, the 5, why the daughter Zainab is not mentioned? And with 3 daughters, I had to then jump back into it. Or what was the role of the women in the family? Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Ali, who actually groomed the Prophet. How are these so important? And this issue of tribalism also comes into play, because as you'll see in the book, I've explained the history of Banu Hashim, which is the sub-tribe of the Prophet, and the Umayyads or Banu Umayya, which is this parallel tribe, which are the cousins of the Prophet. However, later on, they are the one who butchered Prophet's family. And are the ones who are the biggest challengers to the mission of Islam, I would argue also. I know this is a bit sensitive for many Muslims, but that's the history. Tribalism apart. So one, I appreciate, I wanted to shout out to my own daughters and my wife, Binish, also for their contribution to framing of this issue, constant editing and constant reframing. But I would argue Ali was never declared the spiritual heir because he was the cousin or the son-in-law. That's why I've gone back into detail a long history, because the first principle, if any, in Islam was also linked to merit and to accountability. If there was somebody close, like first cousin of the Prophet, who were in the opponent's camp throughout, so closeness to the Prophet, or especially in terms of blood relation, was not a criterion. In this case, for the Prophet, for instance, for Ali, this is an accepted hadith or the saying of the Prophet. And for our Western audience who are not that familiar with Islamic tradition, I'm in the book, I claim that I'm mentioning only those, or giving emphasis to only those sayings of the Prophet which are accepted both by the Shia and Sunni. I've used in the book as actually majority of Sunni sources. And the reason was that I had to go through this, jump over this hurdle of sectarianism, and to be pointed out that I'm using references from one tradition. Ali was picked up because the Prophet had said at one point, the famous quote, Ali is to me what Aaron was to Moses. And very few Muslims actually go deeper into that, what actually Aaron was to Moses. It was a family linkage also in the prophetic tradition. Aaron, even today, ask our Jewish brothers and sisters, and they'll tell you, even today in some synagogues, they would ask anyone from this tradition of Aaron, if they had to make a speech or do something important. I'm generalizing it. I hope one of our Jewish audience member would second that. But the tradition was based on the contribution of the family. It was, some would argue, the imamat or the spiritual heir title was a divine title as well. That's why it was the spiritual legacy was in a way kept in parallel to the political succession. Maybe not intentionally, but Ali never claimed that I should be the first caliph because I am a blood relation of the Prophet, or the family of the Prophet said that we are just close to the Prophet just because by virtue of our relationship, whether it was sacrifices, whether it was giving up even their right, even when it was justly theirs, they sacrificed more than the others. They were the first ones to accept Islam. There were some members of Banu Hashim, close members, family members, friends of the Prophet, who was blood relation. But Abu Bakr, the first caliph, is the one who was among the first ones to accept Islam. And he got his due importance. He was not directly a blood relation. He was a father-in-law of the Prophet, but that was not seen, one could argue. So is Abu Bakr the first caliph because he is also a father-in-law? No, that gave him a certain privilege, but that was never the reason for him to become the first caliph. There were other political reasons. So the point I'm making, tribalism, yes, it may, for an ordinary observer, it may appear that this Banu Hashim versus the others, this tribalism factor was there. But when we use the word tribalism, it actually means nepotism. If there was a clear nepotism, no one has ever challenged that Ali never deserved to be the spiritual heir or even the political heir. Or legal heir is something which is beyond anyone's control. That's why the title, the heir, the Prophet's heir, which some people say to me, this is controversial. And I said, no, it's legal heir. There's no one else, but Ali is the legal heir. No one else ever claimed. Political heir, Ali was one of the four political heirs. So Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and Ali. And spiritual heir, no one else has claimed it. The majority of Muslims believe Ali to be the spiritual heir. I know this can be debated and contested, but by and large, this is not a consensus, but this is, I would argue, a majority view, even including the Sunni Muslims. So the point I'm making is this was based on his sacrifices on the battlefield. This was based on his tolerance and his giving up even his own right. He never fought that his right was taken away. He made a very clear claim saying, look, I deserve to be the caliph. And he also mentioned at that time that one of the principles the Prophet had mentioned was that anyone who claims or who wants or aspires to be a leader is the one who's unfit to be a leader. When someone asked Ali, what is the criterion to be a leader? He said, this is almost exact quote. He said, your service to humanity makes you eligible to be a leader. And that's how Ali was so different. And that's what was at the center of his merit, not his tribal relationship or anything else.
So if we take seriously the idea, that Ali is serving humanity, that he is living this Quranic message. Again, your book is very illustrative of the actions that he's taking, but it also appears in his writing. So he has this collection of material known as Najr al-Balagha. It's translated as the Peak of Eloquence, which is his collected sayings and writings. But there's one bit of Najr al-Balagha that you quote at length and that appears often when people are talking about Imam Ali's writings, which is this letter he writes to a man named Malik Ashtar. Now, Malik Ashtar is a former general of the army under Ali's command. He's appointed governor of Egypt, and as part of his appointment, Imam Ali writes him this letter, which is really a letter of guidance and governance, how to govern. I think in the early part of the 2000s, Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, still held it up as one of the most important documents for governance in human history. I'm paraphrasing here, but he uses words to that effect. And I'd love to hear just your thoughts and reflections on that letter and why you think it is so emblematic or symbolic of Ali's teachings and mannerisms.
Thank you so much for this question. Two related things come to my mind, and I promise I'll be very brief on those before coming to the core of the question. One is, as you rightly mentioned, the peak of eloquence, the translation of Najr Balagha. It has not been really translated into English. We have actually a good translation of this from one of the friends of Asia Society, Dr. Azra Raza. Her father, Ali Raza, from Pakistan, he was the first one who translated this into English. But in a modern sense, by a Western scholar or in the Western tradition, the translation has not happened. I'm hearing it's happening now. There are 2 or 3 good translations, but still there's a scope for that. The letter of Malik Ashtar and the personality of Malik Ashtar is extremely important for 2 reasons. One, about this message and the centrality of this message to the idea of the political and administrative worldview of Islam. If you have to pick one document to explain what is the political philosophy of Islam, it's that letter. And one would be surprised why that letter is not as popularly known as it should be. As you so rightly mentioned, it was mentioned in a UN document as well. I remember in Pakistan in 1988, when Benazir Bhutto became the prime minister, one of the first things she instructed was the Speaker of the Pakistani National Assembly to distribute this letter to all members of the parliament. So it was not a Shia or a Sunni thing. It's all mainstream Sunni scholars quote from it and refer to it. However, I wanted to dig deeper into also why this letter is not so often quoted into the Sunni tradition or Sunni treatise on political philosophy. And there's a reason. The reason is also sectarian, unfortunately, because of the biases against the Malik Ashtar. Now, Malik Ashtar was a strong supporter of Ali. He was one of the closest friends of Ali. In fact, Ali had said that Malik Ashtar is to me what I was to the Prophet. A huge statement. Malik Ashtar also was a leader of a few battles and also had a political position under the second caliph, also briefly under the third caliph, I'm right. However, he was the one who opposed the third caliph Osman. There was a big revolt of sorts for political reasons and also for the reasons of accountability, which is now a kind of a controversial part of Islamic history, but that's real. Every Islamic history book tells us that. Because Malik Ashtar was the biggest challenger to Osman, because of nepotism and some of the other challenges which are widely mentioned in all Sunni sources and Sunni books, the Sunni historians developed a certain bias against him. And because of the bias, they took the bias out not only in Malik Ashtar, but anything which was related to the name of Ali. And this is an example of how Muslims had done a disservice to their own religious tradition. That's why the book on Ali is important. Sectarianism has damaged the Islamic discourse in ways that are still we are trying to figure out, because it has hit at the core of the Islamic belief system. Many people would hear the word Shia and they have an issue. And this book is not about Shiaism. My argument is about the core message, which comes to us through Ali. So now to the letter of Malik Ashtar. I have used this as a teaching in my some courses on political Islam. The courses were more about the modern political movements, the troublesome movements also. However, I would take a quote out of this letter, and I would show it to on a blackboard or show it on the screen to my students, American students, international students, asking them, who do you think is the source of this quote? Something on, for example, judiciary or actually taxation system. And some would say, oh, this is Thomas Jefferson. Others would say, no, it was Lincoln. Someone would say it is Socrates. And then I would say, no, it is neither of these. They also had contributed significantly in their different ways. It is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because the letter explains, and there are no different versions of it. This is not a controversial letter. This is a mainstream letter which is well known in all sources. It talks about justice and equality. It talks about the justice system. It talks about the independence of judiciary, which we ascribe it to Montesquieu after the French Revolution tradition. Ali very categorically said, a judge, a supreme judge, or any justice should not be under the influence of the political government. He should or she should not be responsible or answerable to anyone in the government. There are certain criterion of the judges. On taxation system, it would seem, if you read it, so modern in its approach, and that you are not going to go after and harass the people who are providing any kind of taxes that are due. Same in terms of the people, or the ordinary people. And this last point, I was amazed at when I read most of the statements of Ali, the centrality of the welfare of the people. At every point, his most famous quotes was he found some of the small group of Christians who he said, well, you used them in support of your system when they were young, and now that they are old, you have left them as beggars on the street. The message of pluralism not only in terms of within the Islamic context, outside of it. And he had shown it through, for instance, his dealings with Khawarij, the biggest challengers to Islam, who had challenged the core idea of Islam. And Ali had never stopped them from receiving stipends, for example, because Ali believed even if you differ, if even you are in the opposition camp, that doesn't take away your right to be a member of that community or that society. That all comes out of this statement of Malik Ashtar, this letter of Malik Ashtar, who was appointed as the governor, and Ali was giving him his final will: go and use this in Egypt. Unfortunately, Malik Ashtar was assassinated by another contender to the power, Muawiyah ibn Sufyan. But the letter stayed in the history book. And anyone who has time just to see one document about the political philosophy or worldview of Islam, read that letter. It's widely available on the net. Many Muslims have not read it. Many Muslims are pretty surprised when they read it. But that's one great example of what the core spirit of Islamic discourse is.
Mm. I want to just pick up one thread there, something I observed again in the book about the core spirit. And I think this consistency, there's a part of the letter where Imam Ali says, and again, I'm going to paraphrase here, you might know the text better than I do, you might recall the text better than I do, where he tells Malik Ashtar, he says, make yourself available to the people who wouldn't otherwise have access to you, because then that's how you know the needs of the people. And that line has always struck me in an abstract. But you tell this story of Imam Ali when he becomes the caliph, that he doesn't go live in the governor's mansion. He goes and lives in a little, I don't want to say hut, I forget the word that you use, but like a little house attached to the mosque, so people can come to him and have access to him without the trappings of the formality of this mansion. But it had such strong echoes for me, right? So he's living this thing that he's teaching, but it had such strong echoes for me of the Prophet's masjid, right? Which everybody would come to and would become the meeting place of the community, so that the Prophet was available to the people. And in the same way, Ali was available to the people. And in the same way, he's saying, be available to the people. That there's a sense of an intellectual and an embodied continuity that comes through that I think I really appreciated in seeing those elements come through your book, and that sort of reinforcing notion. I think the other thing that is coming out, and then you keep talking about this use of this letter or the sectarianism, but the thing that I think you highlight so very, very well throughout the entire book is that Ali is, in fact, a common figure across traditions, that there's been a masking of histories, and not Shi'i histories or Sunni histories, but the variety of ways of being Muslim, right? And I think it comes back to that original assertion I made, which was, to be Muslim is to love the Prophet and his family because it's Quranic. And I think sometimes that gets masked, that because you love the family of the Prophet in a particular way, that means nobody else can love the family of the Prophet because you might be mistaken for them. And I think what you're trying to do is saying, no, we can all love the family of the Prophet in very different ways. And that's okay, because that's part and parcel of who we are. And I think that that's an invitation. So would you say part of your project is also trying to have us question our received histories?
so well said. You've made it much easier for me, and I wish I could have used these words. Absolutely, the received history is a product of the official Islam of so many different empires. Umayyads versus Abbasids, Abbasids versus Safavids, Safavids versus at times other groups of the Mughals and the Fatimid. Each had their own histories, and those who were dominant had their own history books, and those are often not questioned, or people don't go deep into those issues. And that's why so many different variations and versions of Islam exist, if I may say that. Those who believe in these torturous, extremist blasphemy laws they would be able to find a quote for that. And this is not only specific to Islam. We know in other major religious traditions, there are always people who find what they want and put it out of context. But in a modern day, this has become a very serious issue in Islam. And that's the lack of access to the main sources. And the more I read the original sources, the more amazed I was. And we're glad that many of the important works are now translated in English language, so I could read their translations in Urdu also, some a little bit in Arabic and Persian as well, but primarily in Urdu or in English. And I was amazed how some of the mainstream or the four major Sunni schools of thought, the leaders of the four Sunni schools of thought, how much they had talked about Ali and his legacy. For instance, Musnad ibn Hanbal, one from the Hanbali tradition, and this is a tradition people link this with Wahhabism or the Ahl Hadith, which is the kind of extreme right, if I may call that. And you'll be amazed. Musnad ibn Hanbal says what was said about Ali by the Prophet in terms of his caliber, in terms of his excellence, in terms of his spirituality, no one else come near him. That's the same with one of the other major books also, which talks about, the name is I'm missing it, by Ibn Shuaib, one of the Sahih Sitta, the 6 major Sunni books. And these statements about Ali, this is from the mainstream Sunni text, are the ones which we will not even find in the Shia history. The Shia and Sunni history, I think, developed in parallel ways because at some point, the issues become so much entrenched in political rivalry and geopolitics and control about sacred space that these traditions stop talking to each other. I think it is Ali's personality, because Ali is so dominant in both the discourses. That is the bridge for them to come together, and it will surprise the both. I'll give you just one example, little deep issue, but just very briefly. There's a very famous surah in Quran, Surah Yasin, which is often recited by all Muslims. There's a very famous verse, verse 12, which says Imamun Mubin, the Imam who's recording everything. It was the first and second Caliph, Abu Bakr and Umar, who had gone to the Prophet and said, this word Imamun Mubin appears to be very important. Who has this status? And this is from Sunni sources. And the Prophet said, it's Ali. And many Shias would often ignore that some of the sources of some of the most important things said about Ali are actually more clearly explained, I would say, or as clearly explained in Sunni sources as in Shia. But it is avoided. So Ali is the personality which would allow the Shias a window into the Sunni jurisprudence and the Sunni schools of thought. The Sunnis need to read about Ali. It is taking off their lens, the colored lens, and that's the bridge that both sides have to cross. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is not purely for the reason of someone would say, this is a missionary message. It is in a way. It is a message for me also to defeat this modern sectarianism. This sectarianism is a concentric circle with other circles of bigotry, extremism, and terrorism. Daesh or ISIS, Al-Qaeda, who were their first targets? They first targeted Sufi shrines. They targeted the Shia communities across the world. So sectarianism has a very clear print in front of us. Anyone who wants to deny that will be denying some of the facts in the last 20 years since the post 9/11, where most of the extremist religious groups use these sectarian notions, sectarian distortions. So Ali is the way out. Ali is more relevant to Sunnis today, I think, than to Shias. For them, it will be something that will offer them a window into what brings everyone together. That is good from within the Muslim community. That's good for the Muslim relationship with the outsiders. And that's why this is, I think, so central to look at it from that lens.
This is the second time you've talked about Sunni sources offering devotionals to Imam Ali. And I think, one of the most intriguing chapters for me was towards the end of the book, where you talk about the legacy of Imam Ali and you really look at devotionals to Imam Ali, cutting across different traditions. And I think it would be great just to hear, what was your surprising, you talked about Shafi'i and his devotional to Imam Ali, which to me was very surprising to read some of the material you have in there. But was there anything that, in terms of your research on this devotional aspect, that you're like, wow, this really, I wasn't expecting this?
Thank you for that. This was more when it comes to the Sufi or the Urafa direction, which is the mystical dimension or the esoteric dimension of Islam. Every major poet or political philosopher of Islam that I picked up, and if I looked at their poetry, I was looking for the quotes on Ali, and I was amazed at the commonality from those from South Asia, from Ghalib. I was not expecting Ghalib to say what he said about Ali. He practically said, I am his follower in a way that many people would think even blasphemous. Many other poets, whether Iqbal or Rumi. The most interesting thing was when I went to Konya in Turkey at the shrine of Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, and I found that in the dome of the shrine, Ali's name was the most prominent, along with the other imams in the Shia tradition. And that I went deeper into it, and I learned more about the Turkish Sunni Islam, which is so very close to the Shia Islam. But even beyond that, I was amazed by the connectivity of spirituality in terms of poetry, in terms of the esoteric dimension, in terms of all Sufi groups believing. When I say all, it is actually there are 13 Sufi traditions, out of which 12 are with Ali. The 13th one is with Jafar Sadiq, the great-great-grandson of Ali, who was also great-grandson of Ali from his father's side. He was great-grandson of Abu Bakr from his mother's side. And that's why he's a connecting thought also in terms of jurisprudence. All the Sunni main imams, the 4 Sunni schools of thought, their leaders, 3 of them were students of Jafar Sadiq, who's seen as the Jafari school or the Shia school of thought. So this was the most amazing thing to me, that in Qawwali, as we call it, this is a certain genre of music, devotional music in South Asia, but also in Turkey with a different name, where you cannot sing the song of God, or you cannot get into this spiritual trance without the name of Ali being the center of it, being Ali Waliullah, which says Ali, the friend of God. And I think it is that legacy which didn't surprise me. I knew about it, but I was not aware of the extent of it. That amazed me. And what also was amazing is that no other, Ali is unmatched, whether in the Sunni or the Shia or the Sufi tradition, in terms of what has been said about him by either other companions or historically by whether it is Al-Ghazali or Khaldun, or it is on the Shia side, Mufid, or so many other scholars. There is this commonality about the spiritual excellence of Ali, which is so obvious, which has been depicted now, exposed to us through poetry. No one else got that lucky with so much poetry, so much of writings about spirituality as Ali was lucky to have.
It was there's a music label, Real World Records. Peter Gabriel was involved with it, for people who know Peter Gabriel. And their logo for the longest time was Arabic calligraphy in the shape of a lion. And I had written to them at some point, and I said, look, I see you've got this. Where did you get this image from? And they said, well, we got this. They showed me the source. It was a Turkish design. It was a praise of Imam Ali. They said we altered it because we didn't want to be disrespectful to the original. So I was like, good. I was like, I'm glad it's just not me having a hard time reading it. But to me, it was interesting to see that this is the label that was actually instrumental in bringing the Qawwal Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan into Western popular consciousness, was this record label, which is why I'm as you mentioned, Qawwali, this came to my mind. And so just before we get ready to take questions from the audience, I think the last question I have for you, Hassan, formal question, is this is an academic book in the sense that it's very well researched, it's very deep, it's multi-layered, but it's very readable. As an academic, I say this, we often write for each other, but this is a very strong narrative, very approachable. How did you feel, or how did you manage that process of writing this very academic book, but in such a, again, as I said, I shared it with my high school age children who were able to approach it, so what was that like?
I think it, honestly, the one credit goes to my wife, honestly. She's the one who has been telling me from day one. She knew about my previous books, which are all academic, but mostly on extremism. And she said to me early on, Hassan, this is a biography. This has to be a story. And I read many biographies. I read Reza Aslan's book, The Zealot. I read a biography of Peter. I read a few books from the Christian and Jewish tradition. And also biographies. I knew there has to be a story. Probably I'll miss out some aspects of it. And then I think, really, I'm repeating this, but it is not without merit, that my 3 young daughters who read everything, my editor was reading it, and I'm extremely grateful to my editor, Heather McCallum, at Yale. Yale's support was amazing. There was some of the peer reviewers were very tough, and I had to answer. I had to live up to the expectation of academic rigor. But it is the youngsters, the young people, who actually read it in a way, and especially my daughter, who's studying in King's College London, just graduating this week. So I'm shout out to her, who writes so beautifully, who at times corrected, who at times indicated to me other writings. And one other thing which I think inspired me was this one quote which I had read, that the love of Ali is so central to the essence of Islam that it's the Ali's love, and there's this kind of mystical tradition which converts the religion of law into a religion of love. So if you have to talk about love, the language has to correspond to that. So I had to constantly, it took 5 years. One last point is, it is also emphasis on, or my focus on, the oral history. Everywhere I went, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, many trips to Saudis and many discussions, which I'm very grateful for. It amazed me. I was thinking everyone in Saudi Arabia might be a Ali hater. That was not the case. I found some of the amazing works in support of Ali from there. That I think the oral history, when people narrated their stories and how Ali inspired them, that forced me to write something to reflect that in my writing, which took a lot of time. But I think it was worth it.
Thank you, Hassan. So we've got our first question from the audience, and it's actually about Qawwali. So just as a bit of a background, Qawwali is, as you mentioned, a devotional musical form from South Asia. It starts in the 14th century. It is what is broadly called sama, which literally means listening or hearing, but it's part of a spiritual practice or spiritual concert is sometimes how it's translated. And as Hassan mentioned, you don't begin a Qawwali concert without the phrase "Man kuntum maulahu fahada aliyun maulahu," which is the hadith of the Prophet Mohammad, which says, "He whose Mawla I am, Ali is his Mawla." So the question from the audience is, how does Qawwali work to transport? How does the act of listening to the Qawwali, how does this transport the person to whatever state or learning or opening of their minds are available?
I think amazing, excellent question. I think this is more on the, if I may call that, the soft channel to Islam, the mystic channel, which is as legitimate as any other channel. The other modes of Islamic thinking or Islamic knowledge and teaching, also like all other orthodox teaching curriculums, became quite, if not rigid, become quite devotional in a sense, too much theological. It's the beauty of music that adds, and a lot of credit goes to Rumi, also with that trance and that kind of one gets into a trance revolving, and the other one is to Amir Khusro in South Asia, who brought his musical expertise and mastery to the work of Nizamuddin Auliya, one of the greatest Sunni Sufi masters. And this combination brought us to a way which allows you to soothe yourself, to enjoy the spirituality through music. For the hardliners, extremists, that is something off the charts, or that is something out of their domain. But I think this is the musical beauty add to the poetic excellence that is combined in the idea of Qawwali. And that is also, in a sense, that it allows you to connect with God and the essence of nature and the essence of spirituality and love for everyone. That comes out so easily transported from music, so easily transported from Qawwali, that is unmatched, in a sense that a lecture through on a jurisprudence issue or a very important, deep thinking into jurisprudence or interpretation of the religious text may not allow you to have that. And that also is credited to Ali, because there was so much that Ali said, which took everyone out of the box, took them out of what were the simplistic ways to understand religion, and more into an excellent zone that connects you with the higher reality.
Thank you, Hassan. I think that's an excellent summation. And I think we need to start going out and start ending the session, but I think it's a wonderful segue. So I want to thank, obviously, the Asia Society for hosting us, Rachel for inviting us, you for this excellent work in this conversation. Again, I'm going to hold the book up here, cover my face because the book cover is more attractive. It is available for sale. So I personally encourage you, I know Hassan is too modest, but I personally encourage you to please look for this book, read it. It is really a wonderful piece of scholarship and very readable and approachable. We are going to turn actually to a performance at the Asia Society in 2010 by Abi Talib, who's a very well-known Qawwali performer. And I don't know if you would just like to, Hassan, give us a gist of what it is we're about to hear as we sort of transition out.
Thank you so much. This is the two short clips, and I'm actually very, very thankful, like so many others, to Rachel, who had organized this. I remember I was at Asia Society at that time. This is Abda Parveen, one of the master Sufi singers, and what she talks about is also the centrality of Ali with the idea of Tawheed and the idea of Islam itself, how central and linked to Ali is to that core message. That's the essence of what you're about to hear.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
रखी है तूने लाज मेरी, रखी है तूने लाज मेरी हर मकाम पर, यूं ही करम रहे आका गुलाम पर। कुव्वत इश्क से हर पस्त को बाला कर दे, कुव्वत इश्क से हर पस्त को बाला कर दे। दहर में इसमें मोहम्मद से ऊंचा ना कर दे। हैदरी जम कलंदर मस्तम हैदरी 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 जम कलंदरम मस्त हैदरी जम कलंदर मस्तम हैदरी जम कलंदरम मस्तम है। सेवन दोस्त की शाबाश दमादम मस्त कलंदर कलंदर पा कलंदर सेवानी लाल कलंदर दमादम मस्त कलंदर कलंदर पा कलंदर सेवानी लाल कलंदर। अली का पहला नंबर, अली रग रग दे अंदर, अली दम दम दे अंदर, दमादम मस्त कलंदर कलंदर पा कलंदर सेवानी लाल कलंदर। अली का पहला नंबर, दमादम मस्त कलंदर। जी माला हो माला माला मस्त कलंदर कलंदर मस्त कलंदर calendar, must calendar, 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 calendar, must calendar. Oh, Lord, oh, Jeev Mara.